Over 70 minutes of address by Prime Minister Narendra Modi in France at that iconic monument in Paris, Seine Musicale. He was addressing the Indian diaspora, and from sports to trade to the ties between the country to his personal relationship with France, he spoke about everything, issues ranging from India's growing might when it comes to the global platform and the contribution of people in that achievement. Everything Prime Minister elaborated on. It was a wide-ranging speech. He also spoke about how India's role is changing very rapidly. When India progresses, the world progresses with India. How it shares several ideologies with France. How India's principle of Vasudhaiv Kutumbakam is also the guiding light for the country when it comes to deciding its stand in the world. Joining me now to help us understand the significance of this address is Karthikeya Tanna, who's an author and columnist. I'm also joined by Pathikrit Pain, who's a geopolitical analyst, and Dr. Swasti Rao, Associate Fellow at Manohar Parrikar IDSA. Mr. Tanna, coming first to you, what do you make of this very unusually long address by the Prime Minister in France?
Well, I think like all addresses to the Indian community, this is a grand show, and it's a State of the Union, explaining to the Indian community in France what the Indian government has been up to, what they have done, a recapitulation of, things that have been achieved, and also, unique touch in the sense, talking about India-France relationship and the beauty and the uniqueness of it. Guided by history. I think this year is the 25th anniversary of the commencement of the strategic partnership between the two nations.
Right. Sir, I'll have to interject you. I'm really sorry, but such is Prime Minister's popularity that we will have to cut to visuals coming in of fans who almost seem to be overwhelmed.
टूरिज्म को भी बढ़ाना है वहाँ पे। हाँ, टूरिज्म हमें ज़्यादा करना है। हम तो भारत में, हमारा दिल तो भारत में ही है। हम तो जाते रहते हैं, इधर 40 इयर्स से रह रहे हैं, तब भी हम इंडिया जाते रहते हैं। हाँ, मगर हमें बहुत अच्छा लगा आज। थैंक यू जी, थैंक यू, नमस्कार।
Ladies and gentlemen, please kindly be seated and you'll be guided out. Je vous demande humblement de rester assis.
What do you like the most in PM Modi's speech?
I think the collaboration between India and France is going very well, and I think there's a future. There's a lot of good things to take over in India, because now, as he told, you can get visas for students who are going to India. That's really, I think, a very good thing. And I think with Modi, we are improving. I mean, in India, it's not the India high seen when I was small. I'm very happy with Modi around the place, and I'm very happy also that he's invited by Macron, because that we can see how much India and France are collaborating together.
Any specific point which touched your?
See, I think economically, like he told, this is a good time to invest in India. I mean, we are all born in India, but we are staying in France. But now it's and a lot of good things is there in India. I think a lot of people are thinking only about the poor thing in India, but it's not. India is poor. India is very good. I think in another 20 years, India will be from the two powerful country, even the first powerful country.
What's your name?
My name is Suresh Andre. I'm from Pondicherry.
My name is Celeste.
It's a very funny thing, but there are a lot of countries. If you belong to another country, and if you drive in France, it's okay for other people, but for Indian people, it's very difficult to do license here. So if this message goes to Mr. Modi, I want that Indians could drive with their Indian license in France, just like with the visa and other things, and for the art also. Because I also run an art school here, and I'm meeting him tomorrow to gift him a painting. There's a huge painting, and I did a portrait of Mr. Modi. I'm going to meet him personally, and I'm giving this painting tomorrow to him. So hopefully I'll try and talk to him about this and about the school.
Do you think that he's trying his best to, like you are asking for license, but again he's trying to do something?
This is just a funny thing, but there are so many things. Economy-wise, I'll give you an example of as an Indian in France, because I've been living here since 4 or 5 years. In the society, amongst the police or amongst the government officials, I think we have a very good reputation. People see us with respect. Indians are very quiet people. They don't make a drama. They don't make a fuss about anything. When they live here, there's a sense of serenity. It's very tranquil here. And so this is what has been appreciated by the police officers. So when I'm meeting police officers, if there is anything, they have a special gesture for Indian people. They always say that, we are a very peaceful community living in France and doing really good here today. So, thank you so much. Karthik. I'm basically, yes, I live in France now. I'm an artist. Yes, I'm an artist. So that's why I'm meeting Mr. Modi tomorrow, because I've just started my Indian art school. And I just want to say this to Indians, that the art school which I've opened in France is totally free for Indian people. It's on a full scholarship, 100% scholarship, and I'm inviting a lot of Indian artists to come here, and they're going to study here. Not films and others, but visual arts, basically, paintings and sculptures. Thanks. Thank you.
Has their wish list ready for the Prime Minister and the faith that he can make it possible, but that only goes to buttress the point you were making, Mr. Tanna. Please finish it. I'm sorry to interrupt you.
No problem. I think it's wonderful to hear the Indian community, because they're the ones who experience it live. But, essentially what I was saying is that, the Prime Minister has continuously instilled pride in Indians who are living abroad, because what he recognizes is, he's not hankering about, them coming home and, contributing to India. He's saying you're living in France, but you're contributing to India's soft power abroad while living in France. So he's instilling that sense of pride, and I think he's been very efficient in doing so, obviously, in his own, brilliant oratory. And then also, telling them about, what the Indian government has been able to do diplomatically for the Indians living in France. This example that this gentleman quoted, that he now would like to have licensing requirements easier for Indians. These are examples of, obviously, that, that will be done, hopefully, but other things that have been done, which Mr. Modi mentioned towards the end of his speech, about the new embassy and also work permit for Indians. That I think, he adds that personal touch as well, because he understands that those people who have gone to France, they're gone to France out of their own choice, but that, as an Indian Prime Minister, he's also catering to their interests as much as he can through diplomatic channels. So I think it was quite a brilliant address, as has been in every time, in every country.
Right, but it's not just the domestic audience that he's catering to. At the same time, there also seems to be a concerted effort in building India's image abroad. And here is what the Prime Minister said about how India's position is changing rapidly when it comes to the global scenario. We'll listen into this bite, and then I'll come to you, Swasti Rao, for a comment on that.
Icon, I think so. Thank you. Yes.
नए वर्ल्ड ऑर्डर की तरफ बढ़ रही है। भारत का सामर्थ्य और भारत की भूमिका बहुत तेजी से बदल रही है। भारत इस समय G20 का प्रेसिडेंट है। पहली बार किसी देश की प्रेसिडेंसी में ऐसा हो रहा है जब उस देश के कोने कोने में 200 से ज्यादा बैठकें हो रही है। पूरा G20 समूह भारत के सामर्थ्य को देख रहा है, उससे मंत्रमुग्ध है।
Dr. Rao, do you think that there is a very visible change in the kind of interactions that India is now having internationally, whether it is the US or Australia or UN or now in France, when we sit on the negotiating table, because of what we bring to the table, we are not just takers or people asking for help when it comes to foreign nations, and which is why it adds to our heft. And that is what Prime Minister is also banking on as he sits to talk to a French president.
Oh, yes, absolutely. And there's little to disagree there, because I have been arguing it for a while now that we had already arrived there after how we were recovering from the COVID pandemic. But essentially what happened during the Ukraine war is that whatever we did in terms of trying to bring the war to an end on the one side and on the other, trying to converge global opinion around the G20 issues, developmental issues, and all our strategic closeness that we built on critical and emerging tech and defense, etc., with the US, with the larger West, and of course France now, I would always maintain that it is a truly intersectional global movement for India. And what you see happening today in France is also a continuation of that same thing, which is the continuation of the truly intersectional global movement, where you see that India is kind of shaping the conversations which are important for India by participating in them. And another important characteristic that comes to my mind when I look at what is happening is that India is not only there for the obvious tangibles, which is like better defense deals and more cooperation on space collabs and more launches and getting the Jetapur nuclear plant started. Those are extremely tangible things, but also the very futuristic things where we require co-designing and co-developing of norms. So, for example, critical and emerging tech, and not just that, the beauty about, say, for example, the relationship that we have with France is not that our fundamentals are very strong, the trustworthiness is very strong, reliability is strong, but also that it is a very dynamic relationship. It's constantly evolving. All the headway that is made around, for example, developmental projects, the convergence on G20. Now, everybody knows India's presidency last month, before they embarked upon this strategic partnership with India, they held what is called the Paris Summit. And if you look at the agenda of the Paris Summit, it was very, very close to the economic, so to say, improvement of what the G20 does. And therein you will find lots of areas that France and India can converge in. It's important. Of course, everybody knows about the Indo-Pacific and the maritime domain. So the larger point that I want to make is, I don't wish to bombard everybody with information, but the larger point is that it is a solid relationship, steady relationship, which is deepening as well as evolving. So it is a broad spectrum relationship, and that is what makes it so special. And I think it was really noteworthy how the Prime Minister, in his own signature way, also made the Indian people the real ambassadors of this change which is to come. So I think that that was really it really touched my heart, and I'm sure it must have touched everybody's hearts, and that enthusiasm was quite palpable.
Of India being able to change the narrative by participating in conversations now, and of India's soft power which comes from its diaspora abroad. Now, Pathikrit Pain, there is an issue where there is a very significant and apparent divergence, which is both countries stand on Ukraine. And today, when Prime Minister said that whenever we take decisions on global issues, we are guided by world is one principle, India has said repeatedly that we are on the side of peace when it comes to the conflict. But do you think that once two leaders sit down, that issue could be one of the sticking points?
Well, I think the first and most important thing is that when you talk about Indo-French relationship, these two countries have never criticized or made any adverse statement against each other ever in the global arena. Number two, yes, there are areas of divergence when it comes to the Ukraine-Russia issue. But over the last 7-8 years, what Prime Minister Modi has done is that the manner in which he has been able to evolve India as a major economic military powerhouse, the manner in which India unleashed itself to become a fifth largest economy of the world in spite of so many challenges that it had to deal with, not much like others, especially when other countries are going down. What has happened is that most of the major powerhouses, especially of the global north, have stopped looking India through the prism of binary, which means it doesn't matter whether India actually is on their side on certain issues or not. They have been able to appreciate India's stand, and the credit for that goes to the Prime Minister of India and his team, the manner in which they have been able to explain to them the legacy issues, the issues of long-standing relationship that India has with Russia, the reason why it was so very important for India to take the oil. Otherwise, we would have faced the same situation which many other countries are facing in terms of, the crisis they have, because they had to buy very expensive oil or they had to print money, which many did, and they are in literally a huge inflationary trends that they are facing. So the manner in which they communicated, the manner in which the Prime Minister made sure that we did not burn bridges with the West, in spite of having an independent foreign policy, the manner of this communication, I look at it this way. It is communication simplified. The Prime Minister of India can explain the most complex things to the common people of the country or the diaspora, making them understand that vis-a-vis at the same time he explains those same issues to those heads of the state of the other countries, who start appreciating that yes, there are perhaps reasons because of which, whether it is because of the legacy issue of our weapon systems from Russia or the energy issue that we have. I said that is where we have evolved that, and others have stopped looking at from the binary of whether we are with them on every issue or not. And I think the West also realizes that we are not going to be their cheerleader for every issue. As an independent country with a strong military and an economy, and a country which is known for its principles, there will be areas of differences, like as it happens in family, but it will not sour the overall relationship. That is what. And the last but not the least important point, the most critical issue for the West is that if they have to develop a resilient supply chain for the future, which will be decoupled from China, if they have to look for a potential market in the future, then invariably the alternate is always and invariably will be India, especially in the manner in which in the last 7-8 years, Prime Minister has transformed India infrastructure-wise, which has been appreciated from the likes of IMF to Morgan Stanley. And at the same time, if you have to have a market, I mean, Europe is in a recessionary mode. The population is stagnating. Where do you get the market? Where do you create this alternate supply chain? And where do you have the country which has the capacity to actually counter China, not just militarily, but in every way? I am not saying that Indian economy is at par with the Chinese economy, but if you look at in terms of the projections, in the next 10 years, India is expected to be an $8 to $10 trillion economy. And also, even now, in terms of purchasing power parity, we are the third largest economy of the world. So to communicate it, to walk the talk, India always had this intrinsic potential, which were never unleashed. What has happened in the last 5, 7, 8 years, Prime Minister of India has acted as a catalyst. His government has acted as a catalyst in terms of allowing the unleashing of the energy. The diaspora was always very patriotic. The diaspora always yearned for the motherland. Unfortunately, for a long time, it was India which failed to look at the diaspora as its extension. And that is what the Prime Minister has done in the 7-8 years in terms of considering them as an extension of India. And the diaspora has reciprocated in the kind of you show that we see the kind of popularity. It is not just the personality, it is not just the work, but a combination of everything together, and the manner in which for everything the Prime Minister gives credit to the people of the country, whether they are living in India or whether they're living abroad. The way he has been acting as a soul to create the right kind of a body, which is the India or idea of India, is itself the reason why the West today acknowledges the country, which they should have done 20, 30, 40 years back. They did not do it then because India was itself not confident about its own position. So India today, as a voice of the global South, 120 odd countries in January in the Voice of Global Summit decided that India would be their voice. So India is not just becoming a voice of the global South. India is also coming up with alternatives, whether it is the COVID app, whether it is about developing resilient supply chain. India is always tried to be non-aligned, but today it's a different country where they are not saying that you are bad, but we have our own solution.
Who would have thought just a couple of years ago that India would be the one who would be heading the digital revolution, and a country like France, which comes from the European Union, would be tying up with India for digital payments. We will talk about that and other issues that are some skeletons in the cupboard as well on the other side of this very small break.
क्लाइमेट चेंज हो, ग्लोबल सप्लाई चेन हो, आतंकवाद हो, कट्टरवाद हो, हर चुनौती से निपटने में भारत का अनुभव, भारत का प्रयास दुनिया के लिए मददगार साबित हो रहा है.
India is making its voice heard. The emphasis there being laid by the Prime Minister himself, and we are waiting for visuals of Prime Minister arriving at Élysée Palace, where he is going to be attending a dinner with the French President Emmanuel Macron over there. But Patikrit Pain, if I could ask you this, we spoke about several issues before the break, but there are issues that we still need to discuss. Things like defense deals that India and France is going to sign up for. Tell us about the significance of those.
Well, we must not forget that whether it's the Kargil war or the Balakot airstrike, what turned the tide in India's favor were fighter jets, which Indian Air Force used, which were of French origin, the Mirage 2000s. So if you look at the Indian armed forces, Indian Air Force has been using fighter planes of French origin for a long time. So Rafale was a logical consequence of that. And now what is being taken are the Rafale Marine, the Marine version of the Rafale for the newly commissioned INS Vikrant, India's second aircraft carrier. So these 26 Rafale that will be taken will be predominantly meant for Indian Navy. But there are a lot of commonalities. There is 80% commonality with the Rafales that are being used by Indian Air Force. So the interoperability part of it or the logistical parts gets taken care of. There is also a proposal for, which has been cleared by the Defense Acquisition Council, of 3 more additional Scorpion submarines. Already 6 submarines which were contracted for earlier. 5 have been commissioned. 1 has been launched. Those 6 are of Scorpion, of the French company has made it in collaboration with Masgao Docks of India. And since Masgao Docks has already acquired that capacity to build it, and since Project 75I might take a little more time, so these 3 are being contracted for to stop as a stopgap situation, primarily because of the Indian Ocean region and the manner in which China has been trying to infringe into that area. Also, last but not the least, Safran, there's a very big French company called Safran, which makes combat jet engine. So much like the contract that is being talked about and negotiated with United States for the GF414 engine, which will be, powering India's Tejas Mark II. The Safran engine deal with DRDO might be a potential one, which would be powering India's advanced medium combat aircraft and the 5th generation aircraft that India is working upon. So it's a large array of things that is being talked about. But today it is no more a client-vendor relationship. France is extremely willing to actually deepen it as a collaboration. So the transfer of technology will be a very critical part of it. In case of Scorpion, the indigenization level has gone up manifold. And in case of Safran, if that happens, you might see in future, who knows, that major top-line fighter aircraft would be made of French origin from India itself. So I think the deepening of relationship in that arena, whether it is with United States or with France, are the steps in the right direction, considering the fact that India faces a two-frontal warfare potential scenario. And that way, while Atmanirbhar Bharat is very, very important, in the immediate to medium term where you have to be equally prepared, I think these are very, very critical deals. The memorandum of understanding will be signed, but ultimate contract signing might take a little time. But these have been confirmed that these deals will eventually happen.
But Mr. Tanna, would there also be some bitterness when Prime Minister sits down with the President over what happened in the EU Parliament just before his visit, where there was a resolution that was passed, and from what we learn, it was despite India having raised objections directly with the EU parliamentarians. And today, as we speak, Ministry of External Affairs has given a very, very terse response, calling it colonial mindset.
Yeah. Again, I would love to be a fly on the wall when President Macron and Prime Minister Modi sit, and every one of us would love to be that. But I don't think there will be bitterness, because I think both the Prime Minister Modi and President Macron understand that these elements always pop up. It happened in the case of the U.S. visit as well. Some senators or some congressmen, some some representatives, tried to boycott the address, but then one of them was found in the U.S. Senate, clapping at and giving standing ovations to Modi. So these things happen. They're obviously selectively and strategically planned in order to shadow the visit of, shadow such an important visit. But I want to come back to this one point that you made before the break about India's stand on Ukraine, and it's very interesting that President Macron had actually said at the UN that, to quote his exact words, those who were silent about Russia's invasion in Ukraine were, quote unquote, serving the cause of a new imperialism. And at that time, everyone commented, how it's a jibe at India. And then President Macron actually mentioned that, no, Prime Minister Modi did the right thing by essentially saying that, this is not a time for war. And actually, France and Europe understand what India's position is. And there was an article in Wall Street Journal, which, didn't really make much attention, but essentially it credited India's policy on Russian oil in a significant way to actually balance or at least equalize, normalize the price of oil. Otherwise, Europe would have faced, significantly more, steeper costs for oil. And I think this, what France has realized and what even the West has realized, effectively, the whole of West has realized, is that Mr. Modi's foreign policy approach has been clear from day one. And this he said in London at an Indian community event, if I remember correctly, and Prasoon Joshi was the one who was asking questions. And he said that, my foreign policy is very simple, and I'll say it in Hindi and then translate into English as best as I can, that, na aankh chuka kar baat karenge, na aankh utha kar baat karenge. Hum aankh mila kar baat karenge, which essentially, means for your English-speaking audience that, we're not going to look down upon someone. We're not going to look up to someone. We're going to look at each other and negotiate on equal terms. And I think that's what Prime Minister Modi has been singularly responsible to achieve. And again, I'm not saying that, India and France friendship started with Prime Minister Modi. It has been, it has been a friendship of 25 years now. In fact, when India conducted the nuclear test in 1998, France was probably the only country not to impose sanctions. When India got the NSG waiver for its civil nuclear plants, France, I think, was the first country to sign an agreement with India. So it's not as if, it started with Prime Minister Modi, but what Prime Minister Modi has effectively done is to tell the West that you cannot strong arm us. If you want to benefit from us, let's meet at an equal footing. And I think that message has been driven home fairly clear. Now, whether or not Prime Minister Modi will raise the mishap by the European Parliament with President Macron, I don't know. I would love to be there when the conversation happens, but unfortunately none of us are there. So we'll just have to wait for the official version and rely on that.
The one thing we do know is what Prime Minister said is his resolve that whenever he goes abroad, the only thing that is top of his mind is the benefit of his country. We saw that when he exhorted people who had come to attend his meeting to not just enjoy what he is saying and what India is getting for them in terms of reputation internationally, but also to add to the tourism of the country. He also spoke about the remissions. Listen in to Prime Minister as he spoke about his resolve for India.
भारत ठान के बैठा है कि ना कोई अपॉर्चुनिटी गंवाएंगे और ना ही एक पल का समय गंवाएंगे। और मेरे साथियों, मैं आपको कहना चाहता हूं, मेरी तरफ से कहना चाहता हूं, मैं भी संकल्प लेकर के निकला हूं। शरीर का कण कण और समय का पल पल सिर्फ और सिर्फ आप लोगों के लिए है, देशवासियों के लिए।
Talking of opportunities, Mr. Payne, what is in it for France?
First of all, we have to understand that there are almost 1,000 French companies who operate in India. There are very famous names like Alstom. There are companies like Thales. There are companies like L'Oreal. There are companies like Sodexo. Sanofi, Danone. They're pretty well-known names. So it is not just Dassault which has been doing a lot of good work in terms of boosting India's defense arsenal. But over a large spectrum, you would see a lot of collaborations happening. First and foremost, in terms of developing a resilient supply chain. I'm sure, much like in many other European countries, there is a considerable amount of dependence potentially for France also, which is there on Chinese supply chain. So in terms of developing a supply chain which is decoupled from China, I think India is a great one. And they would certainly be investing in areas, for example, the huge metro network that India is working upon in city after
city. Sir, I'll interject you for just one moment. The visuals on your screens right now, let us describe that for our viewers. This is the presidential palace, which is the official residence of French president. There you see the Macrons receiving Prime Minister Narendra Modi, and pretty hands-on welcome there, which has now become a signature of Indian Prime Minister. Yes, sir, you can continue making your point.
Yeah, so if you look at, in areas, for example, of Indian railways or the metro networks that are coming across the country, Alstom plays a very critical role in that. Similarly, in areas of, pharmaceutical industry, India has shown its industrial scale proficiency to develop medicines and vaccines. It is one of the largest producer of pharmaceutical, equipment or, materials in the world today. So in that way, companies like Sanofi plays a very critical role. As India become a bigger economy and as India become a potential $5 trillion economy in the next, say, 3-4 years. So in that kind of a scenario for a country like France, the opportunities are immense. Let me give you a small example. In the last, say, 2-3 months alone, the total number of, order for planes, civilian commercial aircrafts, that has been given by 2 Indian companies, Indigo and Air India, Tata Air India, is 750, 500 by Indigo, 250 by Air India to Airbus alone. I'm not even counting the ones that has been given to Boeing. So imagine the enormous number of jobs that are getting created in France and a few other countries of Europe because of these huge potential contracts that are coming from India. Eventually, maybe tomorrow you might see these planes would be made in India also, given the cost advantages that India has. In terms of green hydrogen mission, renewable energy is one area where you'd see there is a huge scope for collaborations. Green hydrogen is one area where India is working. I think there's major scope for French energy companies to invest in that. Aerospace is a great thing. Tomorrow itself, ma'am, we all know the Chandrayaan is being launched. The manner in which ISRO has evolved as a major player contender in the world in terms of, sending up satellites with both, polar satellites or the geosynchronous satellites. I mean, it's a force to reckon with. There are potential areas of collaboration there, or futuristic technology, whether you talk about quantum computing. Semiconductor is one area where the French would be very much interested. So much like we saw the landscape during the visit of Prime Minister in the United States, where a lot of areas which have been discussed in critical emerging technologies, the same would be replicated here. But one last thing I would want to mention in terms of defense collaboration, I think France, in terms of critical technology sharing, still has an edge over United States in terms of what it has shared with India till date. And I think the trust is very profound. It will only deepen in times to come.
From future collaborations, Mr. Tanna, if I could speak about past collaboration, do we see a forward movement in Jetapur nuclear project tie-up happening in this meeting or not? In this visit, in fact.
Well, I mean, hopefully, again, Pathikrit is the one with the details. So, I think that question should be asked to him. I don't know if that's specific on the agenda, but hopefully, with the increasing trust between India and the West, hopefully that should also happen, as soon as possible. Yeah.
Right, and communication has been Prime Minister Narendra Modi's among the biggest strengths of his. Actually, thank you, gentlemen, for joining me. We hope the best comes out of this visit and those negotiations. That's all we could pack for you in this broadcast. Thank you for watching.